Hey everybody, Red Mage here. Welcome back to the series where I go through different RPG products that I have and give them a quick flip through and review. I know it's been a while, but I wanted to come back and do another video and hopefully get back into the rhythm of making new videos with Zweihander, which I think is how you say it, Zweihander, Reforged edition. So it's sort of the second edition of the game as far as I can tell. I don't have the first edition of Zweihander, but I did get this one. I kickstarted it because I really like the look of it. I'm getting the physical books when they come out. They're not out yet. And this is my sort of like very first released version. I don't know if the one you buy on TTRPG, because it's out now on TTRPG, I don't know if it's going to have this sort of white border and the cover. I don't know if it's going to be exactly this format, but it's all out and it's all finished. And you can buy it in PDF form at least right now. And I think the physical forms are coming out as they come forward. So really quickly, I want to say I'm going to get back into making videos, I promise. I just got out of the habit, and that's a hard thing. Once you get out of the habit of something, it's hard to get back into it, at least for me. But I'm going to be starting up. School's out, my grading is mostly done, and now I can focus on the adventure that I'm putting together, which I've just set on the back burner for basically a few months now. And I can get back into making some videos. And I've got a lot of good things that I want to flip through and review. And also I have a couple series that I want to develop and work on. My deep dives into dungeons or the Mega Dungeons series, I want to do those. So we got a whole bunch of stuff hopefully coming out soon. Anyway, Zweihander Reforged. That's what this video is about. This is sort of a grimdark fantasy horror game. And it's set in sort of like the 17th century, sort of how I picture it, the late 17th century, the 30 Years' War in Northern Europe. You know, witch hunters and musketeers and that sort of thing. And I have to say, from a flavor and tone perspective, this book is spot on. It is really, really good. And if you just want it for inspiration, if you just want it for ideas and tone and some good reading in terms of that, then I think you're really going to enjoy it. Now, when it comes to a game, it looks really interesting. It has a couple things that I really, really like, a couple things that I was a little disappointed in, but overall, I think it's a really cool game. I don't know if I'm going to play it as my RPG of choice. In fact, I know I'm not going to make it as my RPG of choice. First of all, my players aren't really into this particular tone for too long. We did Strahd, but that was more gothic horror, which is different than this sort of grimdark horror. And even that was a little oppressive by the end of our campaign. We were ready to be done with horror. If you were to play this as your main campaign, you're going to have a very certain kind of world. And that's what you get in this welcome page, which is a great introduction. It's, I think, very clear and very accurate about itself. A morally gray world, humanity and the forgotten, survivors, not adventurers. In fact, throughout the whole game, the PCs are called survivors. And that is like sort of a perfect encapsulation of what this game is like and about. Yeah, the idea of superstition and the cultism, it's a very big theme in this work. And one of the things that I think is very strong about this is that the game very much, in my opinion, captures that feeling that you're reading history or you're playing in our world, even though it's not, but you're playing in our world as people at the time thought it was. Certain people, right? I'm talking about the witch hunters and the superstitious and the occultists and, you know, the alchemists and those people, the people who thought the world was a certain way. That's the world you're playing in. And it really captures that feeling quite well. I think that's really cool. Now, overall, I would say the tone can be oppressive. Again, that's what I said before. No more heroes, right? And it's repeated over and over and over. That this is about mature themes. It's about flaws. It's about just barely overcoming chaos. In fact, I think at one point it says, order tends to, prevail over chaos, but at a high cost. That's sort of the tone of the world, right? That you want order to win, but the survivors look back with, regret and a sense of sorrow. And yes, technically we won, but what was the cost? I think that's the kind of vibe that very often you get in these adventures, or that you get in the book, and that's the kind of adventures it encourages. And you can see that with the themes and inspiration, right? You're looking at dark fantasy, you're looking at The Witcher, you're looking at The Witch, Grimm's Fairy Tales for a little bit of that dark folk tale element, Bloodborne, the Pacte de Loup, right? The Brotherhood of the Wolf, The actual 30 Years' War, yeah, there you go. The Black Death, the Black Company, et cetera, et cetera. So you get this sense, you know what you're looking into, right? Game of Thrones and Castlevania. That's a great combination, Game of Thrones and Castlevania. I like that. Now, I would say that, again, this is not going to be for everyone, just even in its tone. But there are certain people who are going to love this grimdark, occultic, real gritty, grounded world. And I think that this book does that in no better place than in the Monster Manual, which I want to come to at some point. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Obviously, this book is 571 pages. It's a huge book, which is really impressive. When it comes to the actual gameplay, this is a percentile system, right? So you're rolling and trying to roll under your score, and your score is developed, your score, your difficulty check, basically, for this is developed by adding your ability and then any skill you have on top of that, and that creates a number, and you try to roll under that. I've said this before in other games, I'm not a huge fan of roll under systems, but this sort of roll under system where you generate a DC by adding ability and skill together, I'm a little bit better at, because it's not just a static roll under number. It's something that you develop over time, you get better at as you get more skill, and it also tends to be harder than a roll under ability score. That might just be in my mind. But I tend to think of roll under percentile score systems as harder. And again, maybe that's just my association because of older roll under systems that I've played which use percentiles, but that's what I think. Call of Cthulhu and stuff like that. Yeah, anyway, that's how I tend to think of it. There's a sort of meta currency here, which is how you level up. It's called reward points. It's sort of like that. I don't know. Some tables developed a sort of house rule back in the 90s and early 2000s. As far as I'm aware, it was back then, where you get XP for showing up, you get XP for playing your character a certain way, you get XP for doing X, Y, and Z, and the table kind of discusses it a little bit. This is sort of a form of that, where you get reward points when you do certain things in the game and you play a certain way, and therefore, players will do what you reward. That's just the number one rule for any game system or any GM. Players will do what you reward, and so this definitely has a particular kind of game, particular kind of way the players are supposed to play. That's, again, it's built in. Any thematically consistent game is going to have that, or it ought to have that. What you don't want is a game where the tone is survival horror, gritty, gothic, dark, but the mechanics end up leaning towards like superhero fantasy, right? That's going to be a disconnect. And I think at times the different campaign paths of 5th edition do that, where the tone is one thing, but then the mechanics are just 5th edition, right? And so they tend to aim at that. You have to really change them if you want to fit that to the system or to the campaign. So this is kind of a built-in direction. So again, this is not going to be a toolbox for any kind of campaign. That should be obvious, but I want to make that clear. This is very specific. Now the different dice that you're going to use as you play through the game: percentile dice, 10-sided dice, d6s. Those are going to be your main dice here. And I like d-percentile systems. I think that's cool. Now, when you deal damage and peril, which is sort of a thing that can happen to the players, you roll d10s. And it explodes, and there's no cap to that number, which is really interesting. So you can just boom, 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 explode damage, way out. And peril, which is like falling fire or damage with spells. So peril is a second kind of number, at least as far as I'm aware, reading what it says there. Here are the different skills, and one thing that I was really excited about when I first saw it was that there are combat-based skills and sort of non-combat-based skills, but they're all just in the skill descriptions. So for example, Black Powder is a combat-based skill, and it's right next to Awareness, which is a perception-based skill. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. It's one of those systems then that means you're not going to have a difference, quote unquote, between combat and non-combat. I thought that was, I've played a few games like that, right, where all checks are kind of all the same, and there's no like go into initiative, now you're in combat, and there's a new set of rules for combat. The game is just narrative, and you're telling a story, and sometimes you're rolling for perception, and sometimes you're rolling for acrobatics, and sometimes you're rolling for combat, but it's all the same. It's all in the same structure. I thought that was going to be the case. However, reading ahead, there is actually an initiative roll, and you do go into combat, which, again, most systems do that, so I can't complain about that. But I was excited for a moment, because I thought, oh, that's really cool. I haven't seen a game like that for a while, and I would have liked to maybe see that here, because the focus is it does seem to be that combat is going to be something not necessarily like a last resort, but it is going to be less emphasized than other things, simply because of the danger of the world and the grittiness and the grimness of the world and the non-combat solutions to some of these folklore kind of monsters that you would hopefully want to put in. I thought combat would then not be emphasized, but it is. There's a separate set of rules for it. And what I found is that even if you de-emphasize combat, if you create a separate set of rules for it, players are still going to think of it as one of the focuses of the game. And, you know, having not played this game, it's probably the case that it is just at least partly combat focused. You are going to be fighting a lot, and you are going to be fighting fairly significantly. Although, the final story that I read, the campaign at the end of this book, doesn't seem to really, it doesn't seem to highlight combat as its main thing. It's mostly going for tone, which it's kind of linear, and it goes mostly for tone, but it has sort of decision points. And the combat isn't the final thing. In fact, I think the final combat is sort of a forced retreat, I think. But anyway, which, you know, people are going to have their problems with, I think. Here are the 3 questions. Yeah. Did you show up to the sessions? This is how you get your reward points. Did you show up to the session? You should get some. Did you call upon one of your tragic flaws? You get some. And did you call upon one of your inner strengths? You get some. And then the players talk about it, and they spend their points. And they can spend them to unlock new abilities. So there's not really any levels, sort of. You get your reward points, and you can spend them as you want, which is interesting. You can make it's sort of the built-in paths for your character to take based on your life path. Which is, again, pretty cool. And here are the truths about your character. You each, these are true, basically. This is no matter what else you want to make of your character to be or play, you start off with these 9 truths. That's a lot of truths, but it does really help to lock in the game and lock in the kind of story you're going to tell. And then, again, that's what I see through this whole book, is that it takes a lot of care to make sure that the players and the GM are going to be playing the right kind of game for the system. That's actually quite good. You know, it sounds limiting until you think about the fact that this game it's a genre game, so it's not a toolbox for any kind of game. And given that, you ought to have direction. If I want to sit down and play Zweihander rather than old school Essentials, I have to know why I'm picking Zweihander and what the game that will come out the other end will kind of look like. And also how to get there if I have never done it before. And so the game has a whole bunch of, again, truths, tips, tonal, directional points. And again, even the campaign or the adventure they give you at the very end is like that. It kind of directs you down that path. Now, here are the different ancestries you get. I'll go through them, or I'll go through a few of them, but you can see them here. The Awakened, the Dhampir, the Dwarf, the Elf, the Fane, the Furbolg, the Gargoyle, the Grendel, the Human, the Midfolk, the Selkie, the Siabra, the Tattertail, the Ubasti, the Vargur, and the Woodwoes. I think that's how you say all those. I'm not sure. And you also have rules for randomly generating your life path, if you would like. It's human-centric, humanocentric, that's what the idea is, but you can play the Forgotten Ancestries, which are weird cultures or weird historical traditions or weird races in other games. And some of them are so cool. I would really, now one of the things that this book is the initial table of contents was hyperlinked. None of the rest of the book is, as far as I can tell. And I think that's a mistake, but I could understand why. It's a big book, and I think hyperlinking it all would be difficult and would make it even higher and bigger in terms of its file size. I'll show you a couple of these and then get you to the kind of the interesting ones in my opinion. So here's the human. Humans start with this ancestral talent, which is going to be a randomly generated talent as far as I can tell. You could probably choose if you want, but most of the time I think you're rolling. And those are really interesting. They just give you a little bit of a difference in terms of your human, humans are not all the same. They're going to have these ancestral talents, varied in variety. That's what you get with humans. These are Awakened, which is a living statue sculpted in the image of another. That's kind of cool. It's like Pinocchio. The Dhampir, which is half human and something with vampirism. You get dwarves, elves, fanes. I want to jump forward to the Selkies are cool. Siabra. These are the coolest ones, man. Look how creepy they are. The enigmatic, utterly otherworldly Siabra. live on the fringes of society. Your culture is centered around worshiping a revered ancestor, one who has been carefully preserved and kept safe by sacred warriors. The Siabra have 3 fingers on each hand and have unusual eyes. They communicate using still sign, a series of gestures using body, hand, and facial expressions. The Siabra carefully reserve their words for moments of intense emotion. Traditionally, Siabra wear ceremonial masks that can embody a single expression important to your culture. It is considered shameful to reveal your face to outsiders, but you broke tradition and were exiled for it. You now haunt the roads with a shattered mask and a new persona. A new name is all you need on this pilgrimage. Dustman, Revenant, or Silencio are great choices. However, all roads inevitably lead back to the will of your ancestors. And then the kind of mask you have: a mask of shame, sabotage, intrigue, fury, fear, delight, contempt, or apprehension. Really, really cool. I think that's awesome. This is a great, unique ancestry or race. Very different than a lot of other games. There's a lot of things in here that are like other games. This one is very different, and I think it's super cool. I'm a big fan of it. Chapter 4 is all about professions. And professions are your class, sort of. Basically, you have a profession, and it's going to have tiers of abilities, and you use reward points to upgrade your tiers in each of these. And so you can move into a new profession, as far as I can tell. You move into a second and then a third profession. So you kind of collect these and you build your own character class out of what you've combined, and also what you've chosen to advance and what ranks you've chosen to advance. So they all start off with some general things, and then they kind of have some choices, and then as you get higher level, they get better and stuff like that. So it's really interesting to see that, because you're kind of crafting your own class as you level up. You're not getting super powerful. I think that's the point, right? You're getting a broader net of abilities rather than really powerful abilities from one class. And that's cool. It fits with the general, again, overall tone. So you have, I'll just go through a few of these. You have the actor, the adherent, the anarchist, the animal trainer, the antiquarian, the apostle, and the apothecary, the arbiter, and the artisan, the astrologer. Those were just the A's. There are so many professions. Tons and tons and tons of them. And you can see here, let's look at the astrologer. So they have the description, they have an effect, something special about them, which is see the future. Spend 1 minute and roll an occultism test to determine the future of another creature or yourself. If you have oracular tools such as cards, runestones, or tea leaves, gain a help die. You can add to your result, which is sort of, I think that's advantage. Help die might be the D6, but I think this is the advantage help dice. If successful, either you or they can ignore the effects of 1 misfortune coin used against you in the future. And misfortune coins are like what the GM uses. They're sort of a meta currency for the GM to affect the game and to make it harder for the players, and you can just ignore that. Survivors can only take advantage of see the future once until the misfortune coin is used against them. So that's it. You get 1 misfortune coin at a time per character, or 1 see the future per character. Now, there's no downside to this as far as I can tell, so I don't know why you couldn't just do it over and over and over until you succeed, because it's just the next one used against you in the future. So I don't see why you couldn't just spend 1 minute and roll this test. You might limit it. The GM might say, because it says you can only take advantage of see the future once. I might clarify that and say you could only have it tested once. Right, you can only have your future read once, success or fail, until a misfortune coin is used. Something like that. That's just a nitpick. Okay, then you have your skill ranks, right? Those are the different skills that this one gives you. It gives you basic training in disguise, folklore, persuasion, insight, occultism, and survival. You have plus 5% willpower. You have that professional talent, which is see the future, and you get an ancestral talent, which is based on your ancestry every tier. And you get some general talents as you go forward, and basically, yeah, you get some bonuses and modifiers and things like that as you level up if you want. So I think this is really cool. Really cool, and not super powerful, right? You can see you're getting like a few skills which you're trained in, and you get a few bonuses, like a 5% bonus to this or that attribute, combat, willpower, etc. And you get some talents which are useful, and then you get some bonuses as you level up, but they're not huge. So you're not looking at massive character changes based on your profession. It's not like the difference between cleric and warlock and paladin in 5th edition. Nor, I think, is it even like the difference, really, between, fighting man and thief in old school D&D. Or, I mean, it really is, like, it's all about you playing your character, which I think is cool. And you definitely have a bunch of these abilities, but they're, like, situational, or they're kind of general. They're not, like what you do. And that's awesome. That's really cool because I think, again, it lends that sort of narrative. We're all humans. We're all kind of in this together. It doesn't lock me into a role. And those roles only make sense, sort of. They only make sense in terms of dungeon delving and combat, right? Particularly in terms of combat. If you were just playing a game where everything was combat, you would almost always play fighters in D&D, say, or wizards. If you were just doing exploration, you'd always play thieves, pretty much. So there's a sort of set roles for this different kind of. This is a more general. The base brawler, the barber surgeon, the beggar, the berserker, the blasphemer, the bone picker, the bounty hunter, the bravo. Again, tons and tons of these. I'm not going to go through them all just because there's way too many. But they're really cool and they're all thematically interesting. Chapter 6, all about equipment. And I really quickly want to go through a little bit of this, this equipment, because it's very basic on the one hand, but it's also really well done and really cool. You have common supplies, and then you have just points here like abstract distance, for example, which is close, near, far, and too far. That's cool. I like that. It's interesting that it's here in the middle of your equipment section as opposed to like rules for fighting and combat. It might be in both places. I saw that a few times where rules were repeated. And by the way, there were 1 or 2 sections where like a paragraph was repeated, like back to back, where I think it was just a copy paste error. I'm sure they'll catch those in the digital version as they go through. Just keep that in mind, that there were a couple places, and again, I have a very early version of this, so maybe there are changes already that have gone through, but just 1 or 2 places where I was like, oh, that I literally just read that. And you look up a paragraph and you see it's the same text. Just got copy pasted 2 paragraphs down. Okay, but anyway, here's what I like about it. You have this really cool look to each of these pieces. You have pieces of art, and that's another thing this book does really well, is the art. It's not my favorite art I've ever seen. So in terms of just its beauty, it's not really going for beauty. It's going for grittiness. It's going for the sort of darkness and realism, but it's really good, and it draws you right in, and it's all consistent, and that's so important. It creates one very particular tone as you read through this book, and that's so valuable. So valuable. There's nothing more jarring than seeing very, very excellent art that goes one direction, and very terrible art, in my opinion, that goes the other direction. Even if it's 2 excellent kinds of art, but they go in opposite directions, it's very tonally hard for me. Honestly, I'll say it. It's one of my only complaints with the Dolmenwood books, as we have them right now, is that the art's directions are so varied and they're so different in style that at times I'm so jarred out of what I was just in terms of my images and my mind. And some people like that because it gives them a lot of creativity and like, ooh, now I have to think of a new thing. For me, it makes it very hard to stay consistent in my imagination, and that's draws me out. The base brawl mace. It's just a cricket bat. I like it though. But as you can see, most of the weapons do a D10. Some of them are D6, but they have a different modifier. They have different qualities and they have different prices. And the qualities are, I might have missed them. No, they're after. But you can see, look, there's a ton of different weapons, and they all have slightly different combinations of abilities and damage and distances, which makes every weapon unique. And that's really, really cool. One of the problems is in some games, the equipment list will include weapons that are totally the same. I've seen this in a handful of games where they're like, they want to include all these different items, but practically speaking, there's no differences between them. I think if you're going to do systems like that, you should do something just where it's very simple, like simple melee, complex melee, or like, martial weapons or something like that, and then let the players pick their own for flavor if you're going to have no mechanical difference. I think it's actually disappointing for players to see the cool equipment list and then to realize there's no difference between them. That, in my opinion, it's actually disappointing to them because they go, ooh, there's so many options. Oh, they're all the same. And that's actually not worth. It's better to not have that up, down. It's better to just say, nope, they're actually all the same, pick your weapon. Better than that, in my opinion, is to have actual variety and differences for every choice. There's a reason why you want to use a spear versus a sword. And by the way, this is one thing that no game gets right. No game gets right. Spears are better than swords, for the most part. Spears are better than swords. It's just true. Swords are a backup weapon, right? Swords are your handgun. Spears, pole arms are your assault rifle, right? I mean, if you're talking about what you're using first, it's going to be your spear, your polearm. Anyway, this is my side point rant. But no game captures that. No game captures that. What I've always wanted to do is something like spears have an ability where if you're soloing a sword, if it's you versus one opponent, or your opponent has a sword, then you get advantage and they get disadvantage, or something like that, just so that you can keep the wet damage less, because most, like D&D has spears as a D6, and swords are mostly a D6 or a D8. But spears are just better, right? They're easier to use and they're better. Yeah, swords are cooler, I get it, but man. Okay, anyway, you cannon at the end here, and trebuchets and battering rams. Here are the qualities, which I think are really cool. You get accurate, acidic, adaptable, arming, black powder, blessed, break, castle, forged, etc. And I think that's really, really cool. Again, each of these combinations, you add a couple of these together. Also pretty easy to make your own weapons. You just use these qualities in a new combination and you have a new weapon. Alcohol and lodging. I like it, alcohol and lodging, because you're going to have alcohol to keep sane in this game. Darkest Dungeon vibes come through for sure. Animals and vehicles, animal companions, bureaucratic tools. That's great. Well, the bailiff's lockbox. Oh man, the Atlas of the Known World. And commodities, fur trade, light sources. I mean, the fact that there is a whole fur trade section, that's going to reward certain players. Ooh, we should be trappers. We should go catch bison. Hey, yeah, you totally can. Fight scenes. This is how combat works, and there's a bunch of terminology. Combat's very interesting. It reminds me of like Divinity Original Sin or something like that, where you have action points, and you can use those points on different abilities in combat. And action points can be banked, but only for reactions. If it comes back to your turn, you can't save them up, which is, I understand why it's done, because unlike a video game, it's not necessarily fast enough where you want to bank your actions and then use them for a big thing. So I understand that. But it would have been kind of cool to have bankable action points and more powerful abilities that you can only use with like 5 AP instead of just 3, because you get 3 per turn. Most abilities cost 1, 2, or 3. 1 or 2 as far as actually I can tell. Some of them are free, like talking. That doesn't cost any action points. But for the most part, I think it just would have been cool to have 5 action point things. But I think actually basically the idea is you just use you can just use an action point to do something. That's it. Here you go. So I guess there are some. So weaken costs 2. Street fight costs 1. Casting can take 1 to 3 depending on what you're doing. Mostly you can see that they're 1 action point. Sometimes again 1 to 3, but for the most part they're just 1. Again, I think it would have been kind of cool to do 5 action point, some critical hit where you take your turn and size them up and then go boom or something like that. I don't know. I think that would have been kind of cool. Healing and hazards. I'm going to jump ahead because this is getting kind of long, and I want to get to the monster manual. Chapter 12 is the Bestiary. Now, I've skipped a few sections, including magic, including GM tools, narrative tools, and also a few, there's a whole bunch of adventure hooks, or things you could do and little descriptions of how the adventure could go, different kinds of campaigns you might make that fit with the tone and theme and all that stuff. I love this piece of art. It's so good. That is so good. It's more traditional. It feels more like D&D, a piece of art you could have seen in Old School Essentials or something like that for a creepier page. But I think it fits for this too. So the Bestiary, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but you have the how to read each creature description, and the creatures here are so good. As a quick note throughout this whole book, there's never, I didn't see any outright nudity, but there's a lot of very gruesome pieces of art, and there are definitely some that are more risque or more aiming in that direction. This book is not for kids. I would say just the subject matter of the material, it's mature, but just keep that in mind. This is not one you're going to want your little kids to pick up off the table and read. Probably not. And that's certainly true in the monster manual. The Air Sylph. It's kind of an interesting one to start with. The Arch Cenobite, the Aristocrat, the Addercap Spider, the Banshee, the Barghest, the Barrel-Bellied Orc, the Basilisk, the Bog Thing, the Brass Primarch, the Butler Demon, the Carnality Demon, the Chimera, the Cockatrice, the Commoner, Constable, the Covenite, Crypt Skeleton, Death Bat, the Death Hedge, the Deserter Soldier, the Dire Rat, the Draugr, the Dullahan. I like the Dullahan. I'm going to read through this one. Actually, no, I'm going to skip to the Earthen Gnome. This is kind of interesting. A basilisk's eyes dissolved in acid summon an earthen gnome. Okay, so just right there, you have a very interesting bit of lore and ways to use this already. Right, an alchemist is under peril of siege. Peasants are breaking into his tower to steal his philosopher's stone, which they're sure he has. And he has a basilisk eye and a jar of acid, and he dissolves it, and this thing breaks from the earth and starts eating the peasants. But now it can't be driven out. And now it's just here, crushing steel and bone and devouring people. And now he's trapped in his tower. And yeah, what are you going to do? You got to stop him, but you got to get to him. A face dancer, another creepy one. By consuming the face of a living being, face dancers undergo a transformation that enables them to assume their victim's form. This grim change lasts for 2 weeks, during which the face dancer can feel human for a while. However, the memories of all their assumed form identities constantly clash, leading to instances of deja vu, events that never occurred. Adopting new identities gradually alleviates the despair they experience. That's cool. That's cool. And again, very creepy. And that's, again, tons and tons of ideas formed from that. The Fomorians, the ghoul, the giant, the gibbering horde, the goblin henchman, goblin lord, the goblin mook, goblin redcap and griffin, harpy flocks, howl bears, howling marauders, and hydras. I like the monster manual quite a lot. Some of the monsters feel more fantasy-y, but many of them feel quite in tone with the world. And I think the Lamia is so creepy, so creepy. And there's some that have such good lore and world building built in that I think will be really, really cool. Really quickly, I'm going to go to the very end. You have a great piece of art here. And then you have the chateau, which is the adventure for new players and GMs. It's a little linear, it's a little railroady. You have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do that. Players are starting off going somewhere, and they kind of get information about it as they go. It's very like, no, you're not going to take off. It's not a sandbox. It's not open. You're going right through. It's also got tons of spiders in a creepy way, and I'm arachnophobic, so this was a really rough one to read. I did not read through the whole thing. I started to read, and I was like, nope, can't do that. But I did read parts. I did see some things, and you get some really good pieces of art here for the PCs, or the NPCs. And you have, again, description. So you can see it's scenes. Scene 1, Scene 2, how things might go if the players do this, if the players do that, with some great art. I love this map. It looks great. Really, really good. It's very simple. Just a simple map of the chateau and the simple map of the surrounding area. But it looks great on the page. And I think if this is the sort of tone of future adventures released, I think it'd be good. And also if the style is like this, I think that'd be really cool. It looks vaguely, I don't know. It just reminds me of some pieces of map art that I've seen for other things, and I kind of like it. Anyway, that is pretty much Zweihander Reforged. At the very end, you get appendices for various things you might need in random encounters, journey trackers, physical afflictions, mental afflictions, spiritual afflictions, injuries, and things like that. And then you get the final piece of art there at the end. So Zweihander Reforged. Overall, I think it's a great work. I think it's super cool. Again, like I said, for inspiration, for a particular, if you're interested in a grimdark game, then this is a great one. Seems like it's super solid, very proficient. It looks like it's not focused on power leveling. It's not going to change into heroic fantasy. It's not going to change into superhero fantasy. You're going to be dealing with gritty, grim, and difficult adventures. You're going to be dealing with gray and morally gray, and the choices in character creation and the choices of leveling up and the sorts of spells you get and the sorts of creatures you have all are going to reinforce that tone. There's nothing that I saw that was like, oh, that's going to break that feeling. Once you get to this point, or once you face this creature, it's going to change. Now, obviously, you play your table the way your table plays, but the game directs you pretty forcefully one direction. So if you're not interested in that, you're not going to be interested in this game, like, period. I think that's kind of it. Like, this is not a game to get if this sort of thing doesn't interest you. If you're not interested in Darkest Dungeon, if you're not interested in Solomon Kane, right? If you're not interested in Game of Thrones and Castlevania mixed together with, the Black Company, like, you're just not going to be interested in this. And therefore, I would say don't get the book. If, on the other hand, those things do interest you, even if just for inspiration, this book is fantastic in that regard. And I'm really glad that I got it. I think the physical form is going to be good. I think for most people, probably the PDF is going to be sufficient. Because again, I don't think, I could be totally wrong about this, but I don't think that most tables are going to make this into their primary game. The way I see this is a little bit like Blades in the Dark or something like that, where it's a great dip game, right? So you have it, you dip into it for a campaign, and then you come back to whatever your game of choice is, which is more sandboxy, not sandboxy, more toolboxy. At least that's how I see most OSR tables, right? Is that they kind of have their own thing going, they have their own blended game. This is not going to be a game that you hack or adapt very easily because it seems like it's all kind of one. It's certainly not as hackable as something like Old School Essentials or Shadow Dark even. It's not as hackable as those games. So to that regard, I think this is probably going to be more of a niche game. But it's a cool niche game, and I would highly recommend that people check it out if they're interested. I'll put a link below to where you can get it. All right, guys. Well, that'll do it for this one. I know it's been a little longer, but I'm glad to be back into videos. And again, I hope to have another few out this week going forward. So, all right. That'll do it all. See you all in another video.